Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be discussing all of the books that I read during the month of July. As always, I'm going to first give you a brief overview of what my reading has looked like during the month of July. So I ended up reading 17 books total, and my average Storygraph rating was 4 stars. As you can probably tell from my stats, it was a really good reading month for me, and I enjoyed almost everything that I read. So without further ado, let's jump into all of these books. Also, I think I'm going to go in order of star rating for this video. So the bad books will be at the beginning and the good books will be at the end, but I mainly read good books, so it won't make too much of a difference. The first book I read was Magic by Angie Sage, and I read this in paperback while listening to the audiobook at the same time. This book follows the Heap family, and everyone in the Heap family has magical abilities. One of their sons, Septimus Heap, is said to be dead as soon as he is born, and the midwife takes him away. On that same day, Septimus's father finds a baby girl lost and wrapped up in a blanket outside in the snow. So he takes her in and they raise her as if she were their own daughter. So a huge component of the story is the hidden identity part, because we don't know who the abandoned girl is at the very beginning of the story, and we also get the feeling that Septimus Heap is not actually dead. Other than that, I literally could not tell you a single other thing that happened in this book. There were curses and spells and really disgusting imagery. It was painfully long and boring, and literally the only reason why I picked this book up is because when I was in 5th or 6th grade, literally everyone was reading it, so I wanted to see what all the hype was about. I rated this book 2 stars because I literally gained nothing from it, and I would not recommend it to anyone. If you are looking for a good middle grade fantasy, I highly recommend anything by Rick Riordan. This was just not it for me. Next, I read Smile, which I read in ebook format. I read Sisters last month, so check out my last reading recap video if you want to hear my thoughts on that. Smile is actually the first book in the series, but I don't think that you necessarily have to go in order because I didn't, and I was still able to understand everything. Smile is actually a memoir in the format of a graphic novel, and it is about Reina, who is in 6th grade. All she wants to do is fit in at school, and she's already having a very hard time with this, but to make things worse, Reina gets an injury that results in the loss of her front 2 teeth. This book details all of the medical procedures that she has to get as a result of this injury, and it also deals with themes like friendships in middle school. I really liked Sisters, so I decided to pick this up, but this one was just not for me. I rated it 3 stars, and I definitely think it's a very realistic depiction of middle school, which makes sense because this is a memoir and it's about real events. But I really am not a fan of stories about medical trauma, even though this is literally for children and it doesn't go into any super gory details or anything. It still made me realize that I just can't read about medical procedures. But if things like that don't bother you, then definitely read it. It's super quick and easy to get through, so it would probably be a very decent palate cleanser if you're in a reading slump. After that, I read Under Lock by Mariana Zapata on my Kindle, and I have a Kindle unboxing and review video up on my channel if you want to check that out. I've been wanting to read Mariana Zapata books for a while because she primarily writes slow burn romance, and slow burn is my absolute favorite. I get bored very easily when the characters get together right away, so I feel like Mariana Zapata is perfect for people like me. Under Lock is about Dex and Iris. Dex is an ex-felon who owns a tattoo parlor, and he is friends with Iris's brother. He's also part of a motorcycle club, which plays a pretty big role in this story. At the beginning of the book, Iris really needs a job, so her brother gets her a job at Dex's tattoo parlor, and Dex ends up being Iris's boss. At first, they really hate each other because Dex is extremely rude to Iris when she first starts working at this tattoo parlor, but eventually this fades. It's a slow burn, so it doesn't happen for a majority of the book, but I love that because we get to see who Dex and Iris are as people before we get to see them together. We also get a ton of platonic and flirty interactions between them, which I absolutely adored. And aside from that, there is also a parallel plot about Iris's father, and he is a horrible person who was involved in the same motorcycle club that Dex is in, and I wasn't too interested in that part of the plot, which is why I only rated this book 3.75 stars. I adored the character development, but I just wanted a little bit more from the surrounding plot. But there were definitely a ton of great tropes in this book, like brother's best friend, enemies peace lovers, and forced proximity. The forced proximity thing happens later on as part of the surrounding plot, and it was delightful. I just wish the plot was a little bit more interesting overall, but I still think this is a great book, especially if you're into slow burns. You should really check content warnings before you read this though, because there are some pretty dark things discussed, especially when it comes to Iris's past. Next, I read the rest of a series of unfortunate events in hardcover while listening to the audiobooks. This is a middle grade series, and I briefly discussed the first few books in a previous reading wrap-up video, so I will link that in the description of this video, and I won't go into too much detail about the series right now. Overall, I thought the ending of the series was very fitting. It was a little frustrating for sure, but given the themes of the other books, it made a lot of sense to me, and I think the author really stayed true to his style. I rated every single book in the series 4 stars, and if you're looking for a long and cozy middle grade series to read, I think this is a pretty solid one. I would just be aware that the writing style can sometimes get very repetitive, which is the case in a lot of middle grade books. After that, I read Red Queen in hardcover while listening to the audiobook. I am so excited to talk about this one because I have wanted to read it for a while. In middle school, I was such a huge YA dystopia fan. My favorite books at the time were the Divergent series, the Hunger Games series, the Matched series, the Selection series, the Lunar Chronicles, and just all of those books. Because of my history with dystopian YA, I was very excited to read the Red Queen series, and I only read the first one in July, but I'll be continuing the series in months to come. This book follows Mare Barrow, who lives in a world where people are separated by the color of their blood. If you have red blood, you're just a commoner, and your life pretty much sucks because you're guaranteed to be poor, and you will randomly be enlisted in the army to fight for a war that is very unnecessary and pointless. If you have silver blood, on the other hand, then you have magical powers, and you are part of the elite, and everyone's magical powers are different. Some silver characters had fire abilities, others had water, some could read minds, and so on. So Mare has red blood, and in order to get by in life, she is a thief who steals from silvers. However, one day after a silver guy named Cal takes pity on her, she gets a job at the royal palace where the silver royalty reside, and she accidentally and very publicly discovers that she has magical abilities too, even though her blood is red. The royal family wants to cover this up because it's supposed to be impossible for this to happen, and because of that, Mare is forced to go live with the royal family, and she is forced to pretend to be silver, and she is betrothed to one of the silver princes named Maven. I don't want to spoil this book too much, but I just have to mention this detail. Maven is Cal's brother, and Cal and Mare secretly like each other, so this is super messy and just delightful. I love a good messy romance in the background of my YA dystopias. Anyway, Mare quickly gets drawn into a rebellion that a lot of rogue reds are planning, and she's a very valuable person in this case because she literally lives with the royals and is pretending to be silver, so she gets a ton of inside information about the silvers. So not only is she practically in love with her fiance's brother, but she is also spying on both of them, which just adds to the whole mess. Also, in the synopsis, we are told that there will be a huge betrayal, and let's just say that it's one of the messiest betrayals I have ever read about. Overall, I really enjoyed this book and I rated it 4 stars. Like I said before, I love messy YA dystopias, and this really satisfied my craving for them. The only reason why this wasn't 5 stars is because sometimes I couldn't really understand why Mare did some of the things that she did, and also Mare has a disabled father, and a lot of her commentary about her father was incredibly ableist. I feel like there's always something randomly problematic in YA dystopias, and I was hoping that this wouldn't be the case for Red Queen, but it definitely was. I don't think it was intentional or anything, but it was just very obvious to me and I couldn't really overlook it. So because of that, I had to dock a star. I really enjoyed everything else though. Right now, Cal is my favorite character, and I saw on Book Talk that everyone seems to prefer Maven, so I'm assuming something happens in one of the future books to solidify everyone's decision on that. But after the ending of this book, I am literally obsessed with Cal. He is definitely permanently traumatized by what he goes through at the very end of this book, and I'm curious to see how the author makes him get on with his life after what he's been through. I literally have no idea how he's going to be able to get over anything that happened to him, and I feel really, really bad for him. So I feel like he's going to completely reinvent himself, and I'm very excited to see that. In this first book, he takes Mare on a motorcycle ride and he teaches her how to dance and stuff, so if you're into that cute stuff, it's all in there. So yeah, basically I'm a Cal stan, and I would recommend this to anyone who likes YA dystopias. It doesn't have the same overall plot as The Hunger Games, but but it has the same vibe as The Hunger Games. There were also a few things that really reminded me of the Selection series, which I also loved. It has the added fantasy element with all of the magical powers as well, which makes it different from a lot of the other YA dystopias that I've read. Next, I finally got around to reading The Hating Game. I read this on my Kindle and I also watched the movie right after. I won't be discussing the movie in much detail, but if you're curious, I felt pretty much the same way about the movie as I did about the book. So The Hating Game follows Lucy and Joshua, and they work at the same company in the same little office room, and they absolutely hate each other. Lucy is a people pleaser and she lets people walk all over her, whereas Joshua is incredibly rude and he doesn't really care what other people think of him as long as he gets his way. They both play little pranks on each other throughout the work week, and they are pretty much equal in terms of position within the company at the very beginning of the book. However, they are soon competing against each other to get a better job at this company. There's only one spot and Joshua and Lucy are the only serious candidates, so their hatred for each other just grows more intense as they are trying to get this position. And they decide that whoever doesn't get this new job will have to resign from their current job and go work somewhere else, so the winner quite literally takes all in this situation. However, soon enough, they both realize that there's something more than just rivalry going on between them, and this complicates things quite a bit. Both Lucy and Joshua start to express their feelings for one another, and I will list some very cute things from the book on the screen. Overall, this was a pretty solid book and I really enjoyed it. It wasn't one of the best books I've ever read though, so I only rated it 4 stars. I especially loved Joshua as a character, and I like how their promotion conflict gets resolved, but I felt like the pacing of the book was a little bit weird. I wish we got to see a bit more of Lucy and Joshua hating each other before we got into their feelings for one another, but I think that's just because I prefer slow burn over anything else. Overall, I understand why this book is so popular, and I definitely recommend it if you want to read an office romance with very high stakes. After that, I read Truth or Beard on my Kindle while listening to the audiobook at the same time. This is the first book in the Winston Brothers series, and it takes place in a small southern town in Tennessee, I believe. It follows Dwayne and Jessica, who have known each other since they were children. Jessica has always liked Dwayne's twin brother, Beau, because he is the more nice one and the more outgoing one, and Jessica has just always wanted to be with a nice guy. Dwayne, on the other hand, is more of a broody and reserved type of guy, and he has always seemed to hate Jessica. He is also one of the owners of an auto repair shop in the small town, I believe. He owns this shop with a few of his other brothers, and they're all extremely rich. Jessica, the other main character, is a calculus teacher in this small town, and she is just there to save up some money because she wants to travel the world as soon as she can. One day, Jessica has an encounter of sorts with one of the twins, and she thinks it's Beau, but it turns out to be Dwayne, and now she is extremely confused about how she feels. She used to think that she hated Dwayne, but now she isn't really sure what to think, and she's also not really sure what Dwayne's intentions are at first. Soon enough, she finds out that Dwayne wants to be in a long-term relationship with her, and she is shocked because she has always thought of Dwayne as a relatively terrible person. She also doesn't know how to tell him that she won't be in this small town for long because she wants to leave and go travel the world, but as soon as she does tell him this, they strike up a deal and they start going on super cute dates around the area. There's also some trouble with the local motorcycle club in the background of this story, which I found to be very interesting, and it definitely added a lot to the plot. I gave this book 4.25 stars because I absolutely adored the banter between Dwayne and Jessica, and they were both hilarious. I also liked how Jessica never had to give anything up in order to get what she wanted in life, and because of that, I really enjoyed the ending of this story. Dwayne was such a sweetheart, and he never got tired of reassuring Jessica about what his intentions were, which was very refreshing to see in a book. There was a little bit of miscommunication and withholding of information involved in this book, but that was very brief, so it didn't bother me too much. I think this book was a very solid start to the Winston Brothers series, and I'm excited to read more books from the series. I'm especially excited for the third book because we are introduced to a lot of the other brothers in this book, and I believe the third book is Cletus's book. I'm obsessed with Cletus and I can't wait to see who he ends up with. But anyway, the reason why this wasn't a 5-star read for me is because I just couldn't really connect with the story that much. It was still phenomenal though, and I think if you're into small town romances, this is a really great one. I'm personally not really into the whole small town setting usually, but it didn't really bother me in this book. Then I read Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda, and I read this in paperback while listening to the audiobook at the same time, and I also watched the movie adaptation after Chapter. Love, Simon, which is the movie, was good, but it was definitely very different from the book, so I didn't really feel like I could compare the two. But anyway, this book follows Simon, who is a closeted gay kid in high school at the very beginning of the book. He regularly exchanges anonymous emails with another gay kid from his high school known as Blue, even though that's not his real name, and this is a huge secret between the two of them. At the beginning of the story, Simon and Blue both want to keep their sexualities a secret because they know that a lot of people at their high school can be very homophobic, and they also aren't sure how to go about telling their families that they are gay. However, one day a guy named Martin uses a computer at school right after Simon does, and Simon forgot to log out of his email account, so Martin reads all of Simon's emails to Blue, and he then takes it a step further by taking a picture of these emails. With these pictures, Martin starts to blackmail Simon, and he says that he will post these pictures to a Tumblr page for their high school if Simon doesn't help Martin date one of his friends named Abby. This Tumblr page is a huge deal because it's where everyone in Simon's high school finds all of their gossip, so reluctantly Simon starts to help Martin, and this leads to some very huge rifts in his friendships. At the same time, Simon grows closer and closer to Blue over email, and Simon eventually wants to meet Blue in person and find out who he is, but Blue is very against this, and he doesn't want anyone to find out that he's gay, so we get to see Simon struggle to deal with his feelings about this situation while being blackmailed into doing things that he doesn't want to do. I rated this book 4.5 stars, and it was incredible. I loved seeing all of the complicated emotions that Simon goes through, and I also successfully predicted who Blue was, even though it wasn't super obvious. There were a couple hints, but not a lot, so I was very proud of myself for figuring out who Blue was, and I absolutely adored the hidden identity part of the book. But anyway, I also loved how coming out was handled in the story, and it was very obvious that the author didn't want this to be a traumatizing story, despite the concept of blackmail being involved. It was also humorous and very full of life, so it was a great read. Again, the reason why this isn't a 5-star read is because I wasn't able to connect to it on a more personal level, but it's definitely a very great book and it has great representation in it, so I highly recommend it if you're looking for a YA contemporary to read. Next, I finally read The Midnight Library in hardcover while listening to the audiobook. This book has been all over Book Talk, and I really wanted to see what all the hype was about, especially since the cover is so aesthetically pleasing. It follows a woman named Nora who attempts suicide, so definitely search up trigger warnings before reading this. After Nora attempts suicide, she gets stuck in this place between life and death, and this is the Midnight Library. Each book in this library is about an alternate life that Nora could have had if she made a few different decisions in her life, and Nora has to decide if she wants to enter another one of these lives from this library or if she truly does want to die. Throughout the story, Nora gets to step into a bunch of different lives from the books, and she sees what her life would be like if she married the love of her life, or if she were famous, or if she gave into hundreds of other possibilities. This was a very reflective story about the decisions and the twists and turns that can lead you to a very different looking life, and I found the ending very satisfying. However, I gave this 4.5 stars instead of 5 stars because I definitely did not read this book at the right time in my life. I think if I read it when it first came out, it would have affected me a lot more because I could have really used a book like this at that time in my life. But right now, I was just kind of numb to all of the lessons that are presented in the story. At this point in my life, I feel like I've already experienced all of the lessons, and since I experienced them rather than reading about them for the first time, it was hard for me to be fully invested in the story. I still think it's a phenomenal book, but since it's such a highly hyped book, just don't get your hopes up too high because it's not the best book I've ever read or anything. And again, the lessons can be a little bit underwhelming if you've already learned a lot of lessons from mental illnesses and things like that. I really liked the mental health representation, and I think it's a very important story, so that's why I rated it so highly, and I highly recommend it if you're looking for a deeply reflective book about life and what it means and all of that. After that, I read Ace of Spades on my Kindle while listening to the audiobook at the same time. This is probably the one book from this video that I think every single person should read, and it is a YA thriller that follows 2 Black students who go to a private high school, and at this high school, every other student is white. The 2 Black students are Chiamaka and Devon, and they are not friends at the beginning of this book, but they are both being targeted by an anonymous texter who calls himself Aces. Aces is revealing some very dark secrets about both of them at the very beginning of their senior year of high school, and this is the year when Chiamaka and Devon are both class prefects, and they are also trying to get into elite universities. So the stakes are very high for them, and the secrets that Aces knows could potentially destroy the rest of their lives. Aside from being black, Chiamaka and Devon are extremely different from each other, so they have different things at stake. Chiamaka comes from a very wealthy family, and she is very hardworking and determined, and she is most likely going to be valedictorian. She is basically a shoo-in for just about any Ivy League university, but she believes that she was an accomplice to a very serious crime, and if this becomes public, then she literally won't be able to go to college anywhere because she will most likely be in jail. Devon, on the other hand, is a scholarship student who wants to go into music, and he comes from a very poor side of town where there is a lot of violence and a lot of gangs. His dad was put in jail earlier in Devon's childhood, so he feels like he has to look after his mom and the rest of his family by doing something that could also put him in jail. He is also a closeted gay kid, and his mom is extremely religious, so he isn't really sure how his mom and other people in his life will react if Aces reveals that he is gay. As Chiamaka and Devon team up to do some digging into who Aces is, they reveal a ton of secrets about the school's past, and it is quite honestly a very shocking thriller. I rated this book 5 stars, and I think everyone should read this. It had everything that I want in a thriller, including underrepresented minorities, dark academia, an anonymous texter, and a bunch of very messy secrets. It was like Pretty Little Liars mixed with Gossip Girl, mixed with commentary on racism and homophobia, and it was honestly the best book I've read so far this year. Pretty Little Liars is one of my all-time favorite shows, so this was a delight for me, and I really want to read more thrillers like this. Finally, I reread Girl Gone Viral by Alicia Rai on my Kindle, and I previously read this in January, so I won't go over the details of this book in this video, but check out my reading wrap-up video from January if you're interested in seeing my thoughts on it. This was a 5-star read for me, and I highly recommend it if you like rom-coms. I rarely reread books, so I feel like that in and of itself just shows how good it is. It's definitely underrated and it deserves more hype, so if you want a fun rom-com, check it out. So that is it for all of the books that I read in July. I usually don't read this many books, so I'm glad that I was able to do this in July. I'm reading a lot of exciting things for August, so get excited for my next reading wrap-up video. In the meantime, I have more college content coming because I'm basically just finishing work and prepping for college this month, so it's going to be a busy and exciting month in terms of content and just things that are going on in my life. Anyway, I hope you got some helpful book recommendations. Again, I highly recommend most of the books that I read in this video. I really hope you enjoyed watching, and I will see you next week.